Thanks so much for watching this video. I appreciate all of you staying safe and staying home during this time. And I appreciate you watching and kind of trying to take some notes if you can. If you want to have a pen and paper, that would be awesome. We're going to go over the physiology and anatomy of the skin today. So I know a lot of you haven't gotten a ton of this, and laser students or people who are going to go into laser will definitely have quite a lot more of this information at hand because it's really pertinent to your exams. But as an esthetician, it's really important to know this info in order to have a really nice scientific basis to everything that you're telling your clients, to understand kind of what's happening from the inside out so that all of your treatments make sense and you know exactly who to treat and who not to treat with certain treatments, protocols. It also really helps with sort of the skincare lineup or regimen that you're going to give your clients. So if you're suggesting certain skincare items to them, understanding the chemicals like I've talked about, those AHAs and BHAs, this is going to really help you to understand what is taking place kind of where in the skin. There's so much going on in the skin, and so I want to try to cover as much of it as we can in this little lecture. So first of all, we are going to go into the skin as a general organ. It's the body's largest organ. It's the outer body covering of an animal. It forms a barrier that helps prevent harmful microorganisms and chemicals from entering the body, and it also prevents the loss of life-sustaining bodily fluids. It protects the vital structures inside the body from injury and from the potentially damaging UV rays of the sun. The skin also helps regulate body temperature, excretes some waste products, and is an important sensory organ. Both delicate and resilient, the skin constantly renews itself and has a remarkable ability to repair itself after injury. It's super important to protect our skin. We're going to learn a lot about that in this little lecture, but you guys know with everything that we do, our goal is to build up that skin barrier, not break it down. And it is amazing how well the skin heals itself. It's one of the quickest organs to bounce back after injury than anything else that we have going on in our body. And all of that is to make sure that it's protecting those live, healthy cells that are inside of us, in the dermis, in the subcutaneous layer, and deeper when it comes to our bloodline and all of our, vital organs inside of our body. Super important that we take care of our skin. And you guys may have heard me talk about different issues and illnesses that may compromise the skin's healing system, may make it really difficult for someone to bounce back quickly like everybody else can. Those illnesses can be things like HIV and AIDS, hepatitis A, B, and C, diabetes if it's it's not controlled. All of those things can really compromise the skin's ability to heal. So we want to try to keep our clients and ourselves from getting those diseases long term by staying healthy from the inside out, but also just making sure that we are very careful and cautious if they do have any of those disabilities, and the people without, that we're just being really cautious with our work. So the structure of the skin, we're going to really get deep into this. There are three main layers. We have the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous fat layer. There are lots of different little sub-levels within these three levels, but those three are really important to understand. The skin consists of an outer protective layer, like I said, the epidermis, an inner living layer, which is the dermis, or it can be called the derma or the true skin. And then the top layer of the epidermis is composed of dead cells containing keratin, the horny protein that also makes up hair and nails. We'll talk a lot about keratin as we go on. So like I said, we have the two major layers, which are the epidermis and the dermis. So the epidermis is that outer layer of skin. It's only a few cells thick, so it's really thin. It contains pigments and pores, and its surface is made of dead cells that it sheds from the body. The dermis is the thick, sensitive layer of the skin or connective tissue beneath the epidermis. So the epidermis is made up of four main cell types. So we have the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, the Langerhans cells, and the Merkel cells. The keratinocytes are super important to understand. So about 90% of the cells in the epidermis are keratinocytes. Produces a tough fibrous protein called keratin. This protein is the main structural protein of the epidermis, and it provides many of the skin's protective properties. Keratinocytes are pretty much known as those dead cells. So there's something that is going on in the epidermis that we are, pretty familiar with. You guys may not know that you're familiar with it, but we are. There is a timed cycle, basically, of new living cells from the bottom of the epidermis kind of dying off and rising to the very top layers. And those, as they become dead and reach the top, they are called keratinocytes, and the protein that's within them that they're made up of is called keratin. The keratin also makes up our hair and nails, like it said. The old keratinocytes at the upper surface of the skin constantly slough off. Meanwhile, cells in the lower layers of the epidermis divide continually, producing new keratinocytes to replace those that have sloughed off. By the time the cells reach the uppermost layer of the epidermis, they are dead and completely filled with the tough protein. So, again, that's kind of what's happening on the basic chemical level. Every single time that we apply any friction or anything to our upper layers, those dead keratinocytes are sloughing off. And that is super important to, again, protect the living cells that we don't want just being damaged and falling off. We need a certain layer of dead cells on the surface to keep us protected. So when we are doing services like microdermabrasion, dermaplaning, microneedling, all of those things where we are manually exfoliating a certain amount of keratinocytes or dead epidermal cells off of the epidermis, we're only removing a certain amount. We don't want to remove the entire layer of dead cells, or else we would be compromising and opening up those live cells to be unprotected. So we do need a certain amount of dead cells that really protect us against UV rays and protect us against other environmental damage like temperature and smoke in the air and things like that. Melanocytes are another type of cell here in the epidermis. You have scattered among the keratinocytes in the epidermis are melanocytes. These are cells that produce a dark pigment called melanin. This pigment gives color to the skin and protects it from the sun's UV rays. Melanin, as you guys know, we have that Fitzpatrick scale. Really quickly, I'm going to zoom through it. You have the lower end of the Fitzpatrick scale being like 1 or 2, and those are going to be really fair-skinned clients that typically burn, don't usually tan very well. And those clients actually have a really small amount of melanin. They have a slower melanin process, and they have less melanocytes in their epidermis. Whereas if you go to the higher end of the Fitzpatrick scale, being a 5 or 6 at the top end there, you have clients that are extremely dark, that never burn, always tan, and they have a really large amount of melanocytes, and they produce melanin very, very quickly when exposed to UV. And melanin protects us, like I said, from the sun. So the more that we have, the safer we are from UV rays, the damage of UV rays. So if you actually stuck a person who is a Fitzpatrick 1 versus a Fitzpatrick 6 into a machine that detected how much sun damage they have, the Fitzpatrick 6 would actually have very minimal, if any, sun damage, whereas someone who is more fair probably has a lot more damage that has accumulated over time. Differences in skin color result from differences in the amount of melanin produced and how melanosomes, or packets of melanin, are arranged in the keratinocytes. Particularly in people with light skin, melanin sometimes accumulates in patches, forming freckles, age spots, or liver spots. You guys see a lot of these in our field, and there are treatments that we've talked about, like laser IPL photofacials and chemical peels, that can be used to lighten up these spots. But all it is an accumulation of melanin, and it can be definitely a sign of damage. A type of melanin called pheomelanin makes redheaded people more sensitive to the sun. Also, blonde people with light eyes, fair skin, pheomelanin makes them more sensitive. And then you guys know already probably that a total lack of melanin is called albinism. It makes them extremely sensitive to the sun, because like I said, the more melanin you have, the less harmful those UV rays are to you. So if you have no melanin, like albinism clients have, they can be really, really sensitive to damage. Now, Langerhans cells in the epidermis also contain a type of, they're an immune cell, right? So these are like our fighter cells. Produced in the bone marrow, Langerhans cells take up sentry-like positions in the epidermis, where they help cells of the immune system recognize potentially dangerous microorganisms and chemicals. Then you have the Merkel cells, which I always refer to as messenger cells. So another type of cell in the epidermis is the Merkel cell, found in sensitive hairless areas such as the fingertips and lips. Located in the deepest layer of the epidermis, Merkel cells contact nerve endings in the dermis below and function as a type of touch receptor. So these aren't actual nerve endings themselves, they just are connected to nerve endings that are deeper down in the dermis. And they kind of tell those nerve endings to tell you whether something is cold or hot or painful. So they're kind of like a messenger cell. Now we have the dermis. So this is that live layer, or the derma, or the true skin. So the true skin is made up of 4 subcomponents. So you have collagen, elastin, the papillary layer, and the reticular layer. Collagen, as you guys are probably pretty familiar with, this is the main structural component of the dermis. It's a protein called collagen. Bundles of collagen molecules packed together through the dermis, accounting for 3/4 of the dry weight of skin. Collagen is also responsible for the skin's strength. Elastin is another protein found in the dermis and is the main component of elastic fibers. These protein bundles give the skin its elasticity. Collagen and elastin are produced by cells called fibroblasts, which are found scattered through the dermis. So you guys know that collagen is going to be our strength, elastin is going to be our stretch, and they really do work together when they are produced by the fibroblasts. If you guys have heard me talk about plasma fibroblast skin tightening, you can now kind of understand what's happening and what cells we're using to create that tightening effect, if that makes any sense. Now you have the papillary and the reticular layers. So the papillary is the upper part of the dermis. It's known as the papillary layer. It is characterized by dermal papillae, tiny finger-like projections of tissue that indent into the epidermis above. So these are your little papillary papillae here. In the thick skin on the palms and soles, the epidermis conforms to the shape of the underlying dermal papillae, forming ridges and valleys, as we know as fingerprints. These ridges provide traction that help people grasp objects and surfaces. So you can see that you have the dimpling here, just as we would have the ridges that are in each of our individual fingerprints, which are different for every single human. Some dermal papillae contain touch receptors called Meissner's corpuscles, and many contain loops of tiny blood vessels. The extensive network of blood vessels in the dermal papillae plays an important role in the regulation of body temperature. The blood vessels dilate in hot environments to help dissipate heat, and they constrict to conserve heat in cold environments. These are just some fun facts. The lower layer of the dermis is called the reticular layer now. So it is made up of primarily coarse collagen and elastic fibers, this whole region here. Skin appendages such as the glands and hair follicles are often anchored in the reticular layer of the dermis. So you guys may have seen this kind of around the school. We have these images here of the hair follicle, that little pear-shaped plug here. You have the skin plug. All of that is anchored down here in the reticular layer of the dermis. That's where it can get blood supply and have those muscles that contract and detract to sort of produce stimuli. The reticular layer also contains several different types of sensory receptors, nerve cells specialized to detect various stimuli. You guys can take note of some of these things here, but it sort of tells you what receptors are being used when we have things like thermal, interaction with the skin, as well as touch and pain and pressure. You guys also know that there are multiple appendages from the skin. So you have hair, nails, and glands. If you were to look into, the integumentary system, it really covers in depth all of this. I'm going to kind of skip over the details of hair and nails, as it's not super pertinent to your guys' work as estheticians, but feel free to take note of any of the information that you see there. I am going to go ahead on to glands, because that is super important. I'm going to scroll slowly. You guys can pause this if you need to take note of anything. Something I do want to mention here about the hair, you guys learn a lot more about this in laser and electrology, but there is a muscle that is right here connected to the root of the hair, and it's called an erector pili muscle. The erector pili muscle actually controls when the hair stands up and when it relaxes. So when we have, when we basically have like goosebumps, or we're scared or nervous, our hair, when it stands straight up, is actually due to this erector pili muscle kind of stretching, and then it relaxes, and that will, it basically helps our skin to contain heat, to kind of trap heat, so that you have, a comfortable environment for your living cells to remain in during an issue of heat or fright. Just scrolling slowly, you guys can pause anywhere that you want to take note of. All right, so our glands. So we have sweat glands. An adult human has about 1.6 to 4 million pseudophorus glands, or sweat glands. Most are of a type known as eccrine sweat glands, which are found almost all over the surface of the body and are most numerous on the palms and soles. Eccrine sweat glands begin deep in the epidermis and connect to the surface of the skin by a coiled duct. So you guys may or may not know that eccrine sweat glands are usually not responsible for those odor-causing sweat, like sweat molecules that kind of come out onto the surface of the skin. This is usually just where we would naturally sweat all over our body. Body odor is a different type of sweat gland that kind of comes out usually in the groin and underarm region. And those are, just a little bit of a different chemical process, but the eccrine sweat glands are just anywhere that we can produce sweat. In addition, nerve fibers that encircle the sweat glands stimulate the glands in a response to fear, excitement, or anxiety. Other sweat glands, known as apocrine sweat glands, are much less numerous than eccrine sweat glands. They are also anchored deep in the dermis, but open into hair follicles rather than into the surface of the skin. So like I said, these are those apocrine sweat glands. These usually cause a little bit of body odor, and they open into hair follicles rather than just open pores. So when you have a hair in a follicle, typically combined with that sweat, it ends up creating like a little bit of an odor. It's just a normal chemical process. Apocrine sweat glands are located mainly in the armpit, genital area, and around the nipples or breasts. Now you have oil glands, which is super pertinent to estheticians. So oil or sebaceous glands are found all over the body except for on the palms, the soles, and the top of the feet. They are numerous in the face and the scalp. Most sebaceous glands open into hair follicles, but the glands also occur in some hairless areas, such as lips and inside the mouth. And you guys probably know that I've mentioned that we can only get acne in areas where we have hair follicles. Glands of this type produce an oily substance called sebum, which keeps the skin and hair from drying out and inhibits the growth of certain harmful bacteria. You guys know it's really great to have a certain amount of sebum, but we don't want to have an excess amount of sebum. So people who are overly oily, we tend to want to use product and techniques to balance them out, kind of bring them to be a little bit drier. We also have wax glands. You guys may know that these really are nice for helping keep our ear canals and nasal canals sort of protected against damage and certain particles that are kind of flying around that can sneak in there and cause some damage. We definitely don't want that. So this is kind of just like a very basic in and out of the anatomy and physiology of the skin. I'm going to open up my email, which is arielchristinesanchez@gmail.com. I will go ahead and send that to Darlene to have sent out to you guys, and I want to open that up for questions. So anyone who has a question regarding anatomy and physiology of the skin, you can go ahead and email that to me. But on Thursday, I hope to go ahead and release another little video lecture for you guys to make sure that you are well educated on the anatomy and physiology of the skin. If there's any other video lectures that you guys are requesting, please let me know, and I will make sure that we cover that for you in this time of, staying socially isolated. Otherwise, we hope to get back to class as soon as possible. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good one.